Hi, everybody. We're so grateful for you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. I'm Miel Marquis, Director of External Relations with the School of Law and co-founder of the Brown Forum for Women in the Law. When the 624 announcement came out, I was livid, as were probably most of you, and thought about what I could do immediately to sort of take some action. And what I could do immediately was put together a panel of kick-ass speakers. So that is what we did rather rapidly. Reached out to my network of women in the law advisors, in particular Karen O'Malley and Kathy Henry, and was introduced quickly to the rock star Becca Hart Holder. And we made this happen. So we're so thrilled to have this powerful lineup of speakers who took time out from their very, very busy schedules, as you can imagine, right now. And we're grateful to US Senator Elizabeth Warren, who also made time for us. In 3 days, over 200 people registered for this program, which means it's clearly top of mind and that Northeastern and our community are activists and want to do something. We have to keep fighting. It's what we need to do. I wanted to mention the Brown Forum is going to have Bridget Amiri, who's a reproductive rights expert with the ACLU, as our second annual Brown Practitioner in Residence. I'm not exactly sure when that will be, but that is our second Brown Practitioner in Residence, and we're thrilled about that. Many of the people on this program today said they're open to having co-ops, so I wanted to mention that for our student community. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Karen O'Malley, class of 1994, a Women in the Law Advisory Group member. She's been working tirelessly on women's rights since she was 11 years old, I learned recently. And much of her pro bono work for Goulston and Storrs focuses on reproductive rights. And she very recently received the Reproductive Rights Champion Award on behalf of her firm from Reproductive Equity Now. And she started doing this work in college. She was a clinic escort. She worked with minors seeking abortions and just a general rabble rouser. And we're just so proud of her. Her firm does work on behalf of the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, Physicians for Reproductive Choice, REN, and Reproductive Equity Now. Karen, it's my pleasure to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Miel, and thank you all for being here today, particularly to our panelists. I'm so honored to be with you today. I wanted to give quick introductions of our panelists. Their fuller bios are on Miel's incredible postings and in the invite, I believe, as well. And in alphabetical order, Becca Hart Holder, a good friend of mine, and Executive Director of Reproductive Equity Now, based out of here in Boston. Becca is the leading voice for reproductive equity in New England. It is in no small part through Becca's extraordinary talents and persistence that here in Massachusetts, we have the benefit of the Roe Act, and our legislature is on the verge of passing provider protection legislation as well. So I should note that Becca may actually have to jump off of this call because our Senate is debating that bill at around 1 o'clock today. And she is trying to keep that moving in the right direction. Fellow Newsel, as I've learned we're pronouncing it, class graduate of 2018, not that I was 2018, but fellow law attendant, Jen Rasay, recently promoted from legal fellow to staff attorney at the Center for Reproductive Rights, is here with us as well today. Congratulations to Jen, well earned. My new friend, Dr. St. Louis, who among other things is a practicing primary care doctor, focusing on HIV care and providing and teaching transgender care and comprehensive reproductive health services. Dr. St. Louis is also a member of Physicians for Reproductive Health, and I want to welcome him here today. Last but not least, Dana Sussman, class of 2008, who is the acting executive director of the National Advocates for Pregnant Women, an organization that has been in this fight for over 20 years. Also, just a quick but very special thanks to the unstoppable Miel Marquis, who through sheer willpower, tenacity, and her incredible networking brought us all here today. Before we turn to our discussion, which will focus on post-Dobbs, what actions can we take, I'd like to do a little table setting. First, I want to acknowledge that as the reality of the post-Dobbs world continues to sink in for all of us, that reality has a certain heaviness, devastation, and anger that I hope we can all use to find ways to continue to fuel us to action. Second, the sad reality is that even when Roe was at its strongest, it still was never enough to provide meaningful access to reproductive health care, including abortion care, for the most vulnerable women and girls in our country, mostly poor, many rural, and many women of color. With Roe now destroyed, the consequences for all of these communities will continue to be devastating, and the individual hardships for women, girls, and pregnant people across our country will be beyond heartbreaking. The call to action has never been stronger. And finally, I know and have deep belief that each of you here today has had life experiences and challenges that have readied you for this awful moment in history. Healthcare providers, attorneys, activists, artists, members and allies of communities of color and the LGBTQ+ community, students, teachers, writers, organizers, those of you who feel you're protesting the same stuff, different decade, and those of you who may not yet have had the chance to be part of a larger movement. All of our collective life experiences have prepared us to meet this moment with grace, courage, humor, and of course, persistence. For all of these reasons, I am so grateful to be here with all of you today, to know that we're not alone, and to know and explore the many ways we can put the amount of talent and resources that each of us brings to this moment to get into, as the great John Lewis would say, good trouble. So what better way to get into good trouble than to bring in Senator Elizabeth Warren. Senator Warren couldn't be with us here today due to her scheduling challenges, but she did, however, want to be with us in both her thoughts and in her words. So please, let's turn it over to Senator Warren if we can at this point.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to the Northeastern Law School for organizing this panel at this crucial moment. I wish I could be with you in person, but I'm so glad just to have a chance to say a few words. I am furious. I am furious because this extremist Supreme Court thinks that it has the right to strip away access to abortion for millions of Americans. 6 unelected justices do not get the last word on our Constitution and on our freedoms. We, the people, get the last word here, and that means we need to act now. You know, there are people out there right now who are pregnant, people who will get pregnant next month or the month after. We need to pour resources into helping them and helping them now. That means volunteering money and time to support organizations like Planned Parenthood and local abortion funds that are helping people access transportation and money and care that they need, no matter where they are. Second, we need to focus like a laser on the November elections. Roe versus Wade is on the ballot, and now is the time to demand that every single candidate for every single office gives a firm position on reproductive rights. And this one is so crucial. I mean, every candidate, every office. If someone wants to run for public office, they need to be willing to give a statement about where they are on Roe. And for anyone who wants to run for the United States Senate, they also need to give a statement about where they are on getting rid of the filibuster. On the filibuster, this is so crucial. If we can pick up just two pro-abortion, anti-filibuster Democratic senators and hang on to the House, then we will restore Roe versus Wade as law of the land. We can do that in January. And we need to get in this fight in states where abortion protection is on the line right now. States like Kansas, where a ballot amendment would pave the way for a total abortion ban. States like Michigan, where voters are fighting to add a constitutional protection for abortion rights. States like New Mexico and Illinois that border places where abortion services have been severely restricted and even criminalized. My overall point is to say the Supreme Court does not get the last word on abortion. The final word rests with the American people. It rests with us. We cannot go back. Not now, not ever.
Thank you, as always, Senator Warren. Some housekeeping before we bring in our panelists. I ask the panelists to feel free to jump into the conversation. To those of you in the audience, please feel free to ask questions through the Zoom chat. We'll try to keep an eye on that, and just know that we are going to set aside time towards the end of our discussion for some Q&A. Also, we will try to keep a running list of the actions that our speakers have identified that people can take, and we'll share that running list with this group after we conclude our discussion today. So I'd like to start by turning to Dr. St. Louis, given your unique position as a doctor and a reproductive rights provider. I'd like to get a sense from you, if you could share with us, what are clinicians seeing on the ground in the aftermath of Dobbs, and how can people best support patients and care providers? And Jen, if we can make sure Dr. St. Louis is unmuted.
Yeah, thanks so much, Karen. I think the word of the time is confusion. I think, as a provider of abortion care here in Massachusetts, and I also provide medical and surgical abortions in New Hampshire, not much has changed here post Dobbs, and luckily we were sort of prepared for what was coming. We had a sense of what our states would sort of support us to do moving forward. But from my colleagues who are in other states, Texas, Oklahoma, Idaho, et cetera, there's been mass confusion. And I think we've seen confusion at the level of state laws, right? Certainly there were a number of states that had so-called trigger bans, where the moment Roe fell, the pre-existing state statute would come into effect, legalizing, making illegal or criminalizing abortion in some way. But we've also seen that institutions have had quite a bit of confusion, that abortion providers themselves have put restrictions upon their providers in some of those states out of concern that the legal situation was unclear. And so it's kind of interesting, because it did feel like we had a lot of time to prepare for this, and many of us in the reproductive health space knew this was coming. At the same time, the realities of what clinical care would look like now for patients are just really all over the place. I will give the example of Louisiana, which has had abortion be both legal and illegal, I believe, 4 times now in the past 3 to 4 weeks. And so on a day-to-day basis of is the procedure even legal in your state, has been, a moving target for people, unfortunately. So it's been really hard.
Yeah. Becca, I'm wondering, as sort of one of the leaders of post-Dobbs legislative and other efforts here in New England, can you share with us what you're working on and what you're seeing, and what actions people can take to support?
Yeah, let me start first by noting that we have 3 former CRR fellows on the call. Dana and I became friends at CRR, and great to know that Jen was a fellow who's been elevated. So just big shout out there. So let me talk about Massachusetts a little bit. So we repealed our pre-Roe criminal abortion ban in 2018, right after Justice Kennedy resigned from the High Court, because we were afraid that it could be enforced if Roe fell. We passed the Roe Act, which not only codified the right to abortion in Massachusetts law, but also repealed anti-choice laws. And that was at the end of 2020, over 2 vetoes from our governor. And now what we're really focused on is expanding access. So Roe was always the floor. It was never the ceiling. Just because it's legal here in Massachusetts or any other state doesn't mean that people can get access to care. One of the things we're most concerned about is provider protections. So we know that right after SB8 in Texas, we started seeing patients from Texas arriving in Massachusetts for care. Those are largely people that had connections to Massachusetts. Maybe they went to school here, maybe they had family here, they couldn't get care in Massachusetts, so they came, they couldn't get care in Texas, so they came to Massachusetts. You have to think about what's happening in a post-Roe America as a tidal wave. It isn't that overnight 26 states have outlawed abortion. It's that it is happening over the course of months. So right now, I've been using Missouri as an example. Abortion care is outlawed in Missouri. We know that patients are traveling to Illinois for that care, and there's been a 250% increase in demand for patient care. That's pushing the people of Illinois farther out for care. So we know that clinics in Pennsylvania are full till the end of August and referring to Michigan and Maryland. So that tidal wave is coming for us as we push outward and outward with more bans. So what we're working on here is making sure that kind of the next wave of anti-choice laws from states like Missouri and Texas, which we anticipate will be trying to criminalize abortion providers here in states like Massachusetts for offering lawful care in the Commonwealth. Our job is really to make sure that our providers are protected, their license is protected, their medical malpractice is protected, they can't be extradited. Our courts and our law enforcement won't kind of roll over and cooperate easily with these out-of-state actions. So a real push on provider protections. And I also want to say, we're not just pushing for provider protections for reproductive health care providers, but also for clinicians who offer gender affirming care. Those things are intimately linked. It is not a mistake that Texas went after trans kids right after SB8. And so we see those two kind of sets of protections as intimately connected and have to exist together.
So Becca, for those in the audience, what would you say, what are some entry points for those of us in the audience in terms of what actions they can take to support the work you're doing, or what you see, or Dr. St. Louis, also what you see your patients might need? Where are some entry points to action?
So a couple of easy ones in Massachusetts. One is that the Senate's debating a bill today on provider protections. You can pick up the phone and call your state senator and say that you support those protections. That they go into session at 1 p.m. It would be hugely impactful if you could do that. The other is to go to the Beyond Roe Coalition webpage, beyondroema.com, and sign up to get our email alerts, and that'll help you kind of take the local actions that you need to take to make sure that we are winning in our fight to expand access.
Thank you. Jen, when we spoke last, I loved how you framed thinking about what lies ahead in terms of short-term and long-term goals and things that you can do in your daily life. Can you share with us what you have in mind?
Sure. I think we're really in a moment where a lot of people have become engaged with this issue, and a lot of people are really looking for ways to do concrete work to kind of plug into the work. And yes, there are short-term goals and there are long-term goals, and certainly kind of like movement-wide goals, but also things that you as an individual can do in your daily life, sort of in your personal sphere. Is, you know, one of the big things that I think a lot of people are talking about is just talking about abortion and normalizing it as healthcare, right? One of the reasons why we're in this space is because it's been stigmatized for so long as something that people should feel shame about, should feel embarrassed about, or should feel bad about. And I think we need, as individuals, to start talking to everyone about, why does this matter to you? Why are you enraged by it? And it's also a good way to share resources, because there are a lot of people out there who may end up finding themselves in a position where they need an abortion and have no way of kind of like safely looking for these resources. And the more that you talk about it, the more you signal to other people that you're a safe person to talk about abortion, who cares about this issue and cares that this remains accessible to everyone who needs it. And it really just does wonders when it comes to undoing all of the stigma around this essential healthcare service.
Thank you. Yeah, I do want to give a shout out. Courtney just put in the chat that our Massachusetts Senate is led by another NUSL grad around class of 80, we think, Karen Spilka. So here in Massachusetts, we're actually quite blessed to have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to Northeastern grads running the Commonwealth. And hopefully that will continue after this November as well. Dr. St. Louis, I saw you nodding a lot when Jen was talking. And I suspect you have some thoughts on how this translates into supporting your patients and perhaps you and your colleagues.
Yeah, I think I just want to reiterate what Jen said was so powerful. I think one big thing everyone can really do is just working to normalize even the word abortion, right? Even in medicine, we sometimes tiptoe around it, right? The official name for fellowship training in abortion service is complex family planning, right? And so we even sometimes use family planning or reproductive health as a code word. And, you know, I would say I personally use it in my bio because I don't need to be getting any more anti-choice hate mail to my home than I'm already getting. But you know, in our interpersonal interactions and in the spaces where you know, sort of live and work and love, using that word is really, really important because it is normal, it is regular, right? 1 in 4 folks with uteruses will have an abortion at some point in their lifetime. And when I tell that to patients who feel isolated and alone and stigmatized, they're shocked. People just think it is a rare, uncommon, secretive thing that doesn't happen in normal healthcare spaces. And it can really help people to sort of understand that there's, you know, there's nothing to be ashamed about, right? It's a normal part of life for many, many people. And so I think being thoughtful about our words is really the first starting point for everyone here listening today. There's a really fabulous book called Pro by Katha Pollitt, which really talks about this idea of word choice and how, you know, sometimes on the far left, we do ourselves a disservice by trying to be politically correct around issues that folks on the other side of the aisle aren't excited about, and in particular about using the word abortion. And so anyone who knows me in my real life knows that I use that word a lot, and it's intentionally so, right? And it is amazing the number of people in my life outside of my professional life who have heard me say that and then come to me with their own abortion story or a question or a concern or something they didn't know about. And I think that's been more so now since Dobbs, that people are asking more about it. But I think opening yourself up as an ally by using those words, saying it proud, you know, get a sticker, put it on your car, put it on your lanyard, right? All that kind of stuff really goes far.
I want to jump in too to say, you know, the anti-choice movement made a 4-decade investment in state and local politics. And that is something that we need to be emulating. So get to know the people on your school board, get to know your state rep, get to know your state senator. You have much easier access to them than you think. And your voice is powerful. Go to their coffee hours, invite them to your home and have a, you know, an event where you get to talk to them about abortion. But that we have to be investing in state and local politics. Our investments have been largely at the federal level, and they have not and will not protect us. They can't pass paid family medical leave. They can't pass universal pre-K. They can't even fix the baby formula shortage. So the investments that we need to make right now on our side are really state and local politics.
Dana, I want to bring you into this conversation. And, you know, I just want to focus a little bit on language, because I think you had said this yesterday when we spoke about normalizing language, but being careful to normalize what's not normal when we were talking about haven states. And there was actually a great question in the chat about, I think it came from Selenia, and I'm sorry, because my chats are very tiny on my screen, so I could see everything. Who's in California, asking how she can get involved in helping to provide sanctuary for those who need to travel. And I'm wondering if you could speak to what you're seeing and where you're seeing places for hope and activism.
Sure. Well, before I start, as a Northeastern grad, I just am thrilled to be with you all and with some longtime friends and former colleagues. So
I work at National Advocates for Pregnant Women, and we have been for the past 20 years defending people who have been criminalized because of pregnancy in criminal defense cases, in family regulation cases. And what I think is important to note when we talk about sort of where do we go from here or what we can do is that reproductive justice is a criminal justice issue. It was before, it is even more so now. We are facing the likelihood of increased criminalization of pregnancy, both for patients, for providers, for funds, for patient support organizations. And one of the realities that many of our cases and our clients, they've existed in sort of like a post-Roe America already, in which they've been charged with things like murder or manslaughter or feticide for experiencing a pregnancy loss or self-managing an abortion, or for exposing their fetus to some perceived risk of harm and being charged with child neglect or child abuse. And it's the same ideology at the root of restrictions on abortion access and criminalization of pregnancy, and that's fetal personhood, which again, if we're talking about language and we're talking about normalizing these concepts, that has been an incredibly insidious and strategic and successful campaign to normalize the idea that fetuses are people, that they have constitutional rights. We saw it very plainly in Justice Alito's majority decision, essentially saying that a state's interest in in prenatal life, I think is the language he used, in prenatal life, justifies sort of any government intrusion whatsoever, including complete abortion bans. So the same forces that are restricting abortion access completely and entirely are the same that have regulated pregnancy to such a degree that it has criminalized people. And whenever we talk about criminal justice or the criminal legal system, this disproportionately impacts people of color, poor people, drug using people. And we see that in our cases now, and we expect to see more of that coming. And just to piggyback off of your point, Karen, or your comment, many of us working in this space are already referring to banned states and access states, or banned states and haven states. And I just remarked yesterday at how quickly we've all adjusted, or not adjusted, but like we've already labeled or we've already come up with terminology around this new dynamic and how sort of terrifying it is. But that also reflects the necessity and the need for us to pivot and to figure out new strategies. And in many ways, the work that Becca's been doing in Massachusetts, preparing for this, and sort of, expanding access and ways in which places that are going to receive more patients can build up their infrastructure. But it's just it's disorienting, frankly, to be thrust into a new world so quickly. I've noted, I worked in government for a while, and even the smallest little regulation around a poster in a business had a 90-day, 120-day, 180-day implementation period. But with our fundamental right to abortion, we lost it like that. And then, I just think about the complete and utter disregard of what this means, what the lived experience of people who are now facing this just doesn't factor in whatsoever. So as for what people can do, I would lift up what Jen and Dr. St. Louis and Becca have said. I would also add to that to really think about the interconnectedness of these issues. When we talk about local elections, think about your local prosecutor too. We have places in this country that are prosecuting pregnant women at exceedingly high rates because a prosecutor wants to. They think that it's politically beneficial. They believe in it. And then the county next door is not doing it at all. So I want folks to think about this as a criminal justice issue and connect it to all the other justice issues that we're all fighting for, because it's so deeply connected to economic justice, to climate justice, immigrant justice. Like, these are just, we can't work in silos, and this, I think, is proving that for us. And then separately, like, this is also voting rights. I will stop talking after I say this, but yesterday, Dr. Kiara Bridges, also a former CRR fellow, testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I encourage everyone to watch it because she connects these issues around attacks on trans people, around attacks on voting rights, and and really just, it's a masterclass in sort of how we need to be thinking about these issues. So something that folks can tune into and get that video.
So Dana, I'm curious, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I wanted to
Jen.
just jump in and add also to what Becca said and Dana said about paying attention to state and local level elections and looking at your prosecutors. I also want to plug in state court judges that are elected in states that have restrictions on youth who can only access abortion if they get a judicial bypass or parental consent. State court judges that are elected, make sure that you're keeping in mind who you're electing in those elections. Now that the federal courts are no longer a place where we can fight for these rights, state courts are more and more going to be the place where these rights are going to be litigated. Your state court judges are the ones that are going to be interpreting what your state constitution protects. So I just kind of wanted to add that onto the list that Becca and Dana have created.
Yeah. I want to ask a question. I want to put something out there. I always have concerns. I think that I completely agree with the interconnectedness of all these issues, full stop. I worry as a strategic matter that when we connect all of the issues, that as leaders, we're painting a picture of something that feels so immovable and so big to solve, when the right is so effective at coming up with something as simple as the heartbeat bill that they can rally people around. And I want to ask, understanding that interconnectedness, how do we go about taking specific actions in specific areas to empower people to act and to propel change, while also being inclusive and while also seeing the interconnectedness? Because I want people to walk away from this discussion with very concrete things that they can feel that they can do and bring their skills to bear. I want to open that up to the panel.
I'll start. I think one, look, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the breadth of issues facing our country right now. And the way that I kind of personally parse it is that in my life, the thing that gets me animated, the thing that gets me texting for candidates or making phone calls to the state legislature or showing up at rallies is reproductive equity. That's what animates me. You should do the thing that animates you. If it's voting rights, if it's climate, whatever it is, you should do that thing because it's the thing that's going to get you up off the couch and into the streets. But you should do it with a lens that these fights are all one fight, that we don't win climate without winning reproductive equity. We don't win reproductive equity without winning voting rights. So I think it's both being true to what motivates you and being really intersectional when you take those actions.
Yeah, I would agree that I think that was very well put. I think we have to take what motivates us as the thing that moves us forward. I think for me in the abortion space, when I started providing this care, it felt like there was a world of need. Everything was wrong, right? Like there were states that were moving forward with all these restrictive trap laws and all sorts of things. And then this was, before Massachusetts had passed the Roe Act. And so we had sort of things within our own state we were working on. And then, there are the local politics, right? I cannot currently provide an abortion at the hospital where I am privileged, even though I provide abortions in the same town down the street, right? There are all of these restrictions. And I feel like I spent a long time feeling very overwhelmed by how many different things needed to be fixed. And I have gotten through that by having a large coalition of folks that are part of my sort of reproductive health family who I know are working on some of those things, right? And that because you can't be the flag bearer for the entire fight yourself, right? You can't alone make these changes. These are insurmountable changes that are happening in our country right now, right? And I think you have to start from a place of like, what can I do myself, right? Like, what are the fights I can fight? And some of those are local and some of them are small, and those are still really meaningful.
Right. And Dana, you shared with us yesterday even about the California prosecutor who had been, just hell-bent on prosecuting pregnant people who was outvoted
Yeah.
in a very conservative part of California. That's a big impact people had based around criminal justice and reproductive rights.
Yeah, it was a small bright spot in an otherwise very grim few weeks, but we worked on 2 cases out of the single county in California in the Central Valley. 2 women experienced pregnancy loss and were both charged with murder. One pled to manslaughter and was her plea was overturned as unconstitutional very recently. She's actually been released after serving 4 years. The other woman spent 19 months in jail, and we were able to get her charges dismissed as well. But the DA, Republican DA, was challenged by a more moderate Republican in the county, and she made the challenger made this a campaign issue and attended very small local protests in support of these 2 women and against these prosecutions, and she won. And it kind of shocked a lot of the sort of local election criminal justice folks who watch these things. And yes, it's California, but it is a very conservative spot in that state. And we saw just a real anger around the fact that the local prosecutor was using his office's resources in this way. And that was a lot of local activism, calling attention to this, holding very small rallies and vigils, and not letting up. And that was really, really critical. And so, he won't be there in the fall.
So we're getting a lot of questions in the chat, and I know a lot of you are focused on this issue as well. How can folks best support patients who need to travel for abortion care? Is it through supporting abortion funds with resources and treasure? Is it volunteering? Is it driving? What can people specifically do in various parts of the country to help patients?
I think from my perspective as a provider, National Network of Abortion Funds is the first place to start. Whatever dollars you have to spare, send them there. There are a number of organizations that sort of work within that organization to help connect patients with clinics and to provide housing, transportation, et cetera. So they're really well connected. They've existed since before this, and they are seeing an absolute skyrocketing of need in terms of patients needing more resources to travel. So I would definitely start there. I hear sort of the calls to, everybody kind of wants to be on the ground, right? Everybody, even within the medical system, so many of my colleagues have reached out being like, oh, can I learn abortions now? And I think actually what's needed is probably financial support to get folks to the care that they need.
Absolutely, I echo that. If you're able to donate to abortion funds, particularly I want to center patients in Oklahoma and Texas where abortion access has been decimated for months before we even got the decision in Dobbs. To the extent that you can give, I highly encourage everyone to donate to their local abortion fund. If you're interested in volunteering, that's great. I highly encourage you to contact your local abortion fund and local practical support network first. As you can imagine, the work that they've been doing for decades to help patients access abortion takes a lot of organization and leadership and logistics to make sure that patients get access to safe and secure housing, transportation, and to make sure that their information is kept confidential. So part of that process means that they need to vet all of their volunteers, right? And a lot of them have to tour housing if you're offering accommodations, for example. I think the biggest thing that I can say is make contact with a local abortion fund first, let them know that you're interested, and be patient, because I think they're really overrun with not only patients needing their help, but also well-meaning volunteers who really want to make sure that they are able to contribute. One thing that I've seen circulated a lot is don't call local abortion funds, email them, sign up for their newsletters, follow them on social media, because you want to keep the phone lines open for patients who need to access assistance from funds.
And just for everyone's benefit, Becca sent around in the chat a list of all of the abortion funds in the country, a resource that people can check. Dana, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple other suggestions. I know that it might not seem that satisfying to click a few buttons on your computer to donate, but as someone who now is running a small nonprofit and looking at donations coming in and looking at how we're going to balance our budget and pay our staff and all the things, it actually is incredibly meaningful to donate as a monthly donor. So there are ACN is another abortion care network, is a network of independent abortion clinics. I think, Jen, you had flagged this on our prep call around some clinics are relocating to states to provide care. Partners is a new clinic in Maryland that essentially crowdfunded their first several $100,000 to open up. And that's going to be a crucial location for people traveling from the South. So there are a lot of places that need resources, and the need is going to continue. So if you can set up a 5, 10, 20 or more monthly donation and make that commitment, I think that is really, really meaningful. And then the other thing I would raise is there are organizations that people in blue states can sort of like adopt a state and really target donations to very local elections. And an organization that's been doing this is called the States Project, and they organize giving circles for people in more progressive states to sort of focus on particular local candidates in states where you could flip a house or you could protect a governor's veto. And so there are places that are doing some very sort of like very targeted fundraising and organizing. And I also think creating your own giving circle, organizing a group of friends to adopt an organization once a quarter, invite someone to speak for 20 minutes, that really multiplies both the information that's getting out and also the power of the donation. So we've been a part of a few of those, and they've been incredibly powerful. And it's just also really cool to see like a group of friends gather together and socialize over like doing something, Right. So just a few other suggestions.
Yeah, and I just want to add my 2 cents to that and amplify that. Like, have fun with it. I know this year I learned it was Amy Coney Barrett's 50th birthday. I sent an email to over 500 of my closest friends saying, here's a way to celebrate her birthday by donating to these organizations. And I can tell you those organizations got a really good amount of money. Jen was sharing with us last night. She's done bake sales. She's a baker. She's done bake sales for reproductive equity organizations. Like, there's ways to bring creativity to this. And speaking of creativity, Neil just sent this around in the chat, and Becca, maybe you could speak to this as well. But Reproductive Equity Now, for the students on this call especially, highlighted and awarded students at BU for an incredible project that they did. So Becca, I don't want to take away the punchline. Why don't you share their project with us?
Yeah, so undergrad students at BU spent about 4 years fighting to get a vending machine with over-the-counter emergency contraception accessible on their campus. They have had an absolutely overwhelming response. I think as of at the end of May, they had it had been up for a couple months. They'd already sold like 900 pills at cost, and then reinvested in more pills. And there's just been a huge demand on the campus. It's a really important way to break down barriers and get people, the healthcare that they need immediately. So that's something that I think they're at Harvard and Brandeis as well. And we know there are some municipalities in the state looking at easy vending machines. So it's just I think it's a really exciting way to try to get reproductive healthcare to people safely without barriers.
Right. And think about the platforms that you have. I think, Becca, hopefully I'm not overstating this, but you gave those students a platform. And from what I understood, your event was only about 2 weeks ago. And they're hearing from students across the country now, having benefited from your platform, looking to replicate their efforts. So all of us have platforms, whether you know it or not. You have a platform, and how can you access that platform to amplify and replicate all of these incredibly creative efforts. So I did want to get, because I know that there's a number of questions in the chat, and I wanted to make sure we're bringing people in the conversation. There are some questions sort of about some of the legal landscape, and Jen, I'm wondering if you want to speak to that a little bit in terms of the legal landscape you're seeing in terms of federal action and inaction. And how we can best respond to that. And then also there was a specific question about efforts to dismantle the Hyde Amendment as well.
Absolutely. So in terms of federal action, something concrete that you can do is call your senators, call your representatives. The House of Representatives have a vote scheduled this Friday for the Women's Health Protection Act again. Get your current representatives on the record for where they stand on that issue. This is the law, the Women's Health Protection Act, that will provide a statutory right to access and provide abortion. They also have currently on the schedule a vote on the Ensuring Access to Abortion Act, which is going to be protecting the federal right to travel in order to access abortion, right? So call them, make sure that you let them know how you feel about these issues, and get them on the record for their votes of what their positions are on these issues. In terms of repealing the Hyde Amendment, yes, I want to name that the Hyde Amendment for years has prevented low-income people from using their public insurance, Medicaid, to cover abortion services, because the Hyde Amendment prevents federal funds from being used to cover abortion. There is a case, Harris v. McRae, that essentially upheld the Hyde Amendment in part because the Equal Protections Clause does not protect poverty as a suspect class. And that is definitely, I mentioned before, one of the, what we in the movement can do and what people outside the movement can do can be split between sort of short-term goals and long-term goals. And repealing the Hyde Amendment using other, means is definitely part of the long-term goals. There are a lot of people working on kind of trying to envision what this legal landscape can look like in 20 to 30 years. And this is really the time to be bold and to be creative and to try different avenues to try to achieve that.
Right. There's a good question. Oh, Becca, go ahead, please.
Well, I just wanted to add one thing to what Jen was saying, which is that, so my congresswoman is Ayanna Pressley. So, it can feel kind of frustrating to pick up the phone and say, I'm calling one of the lead sponsors to the Women's Health Protection Act to say that I support you. I know that's a feeling of frustration that folks in Massachusetts can have, and California. I see some folks from California on here too. My suggestion to you is reach out to your friends in red states and give them everything they need to make a phone call, right? Red and purple states where we really need to hear. Ayanna Pressley always needs calls so that she knows that her constituents support her, but it's even more important that I call my friends in Oklahoma and ask them to pick up the phone and make it as easy as possible for them to do it. So I just really encourage you to not let the fact that your Congress person supports WIPA, for example, to deter you from doing outreach on that bill.
Right. It's such an important point, Becca. And one of the takeaways I had from your event a couple of weeks ago, I left feeling like one of the most important things that I heard was something said in the introduction of Senator Maggie Hassan, which was how hard it is to get elected in a purple state. Everything that you do ticks off half the population. And how hard is it to thread that and to take hits from the left, to take hits from the right and still get elected? And I think it's so critically important that we support particularly those who are continuing to put their hearts and souls and brains behind running for office in states where the odds are difficult to achieve electoral success. I think it's so critically important. There's a really good question in the chat about what is being done to make resources known in Spanish-speaking communities. Is there a lead organization on that? And specifically, Chris was wondering if the list at Ally shared is available in other languages yet, which would be amazing. I don't know if any of our speakers would know that. The list that
the list was a Google Doc, but if you go to the abortionfunds.org website, you can find a list of funds in other languages. I'll speak to our own work. We have something called the New England Care Guide, and it has a zip code finder so that you put your zip code in and real reproductive health care clinics pop up, and also fake clinics posing as clinics pop up. That is available in Spanish as well. But like Dana said, like even small investments can help me get that translated into multiple languages. It's often just a resource issue, not a desire to get it translated issue. So totally agree that it is incumbent on us to do as much translation as we possibly can. And Dana just put in the chat that the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice is the leader of the Latina groups doing advocacy in this space.
Thank you, Becca. Another
Also,
question.
oh,
Go ahead. Thank you. Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say too, on the patient-facing side too, for patients searching for, resources about contraception or abortion in particular, there are two organizations that have a number of really great vetted resources in multiple languages. So the Reproductive Health Access Project, which is based out of Institute for Family Health in New York City, has lots of patient-facing resources in many languages. And then newly here in Massachusetts, actually PIC, the Partners in Contraceptive Choice and Knowledge, which is based at the Department of Family Planning at Boston Medical Center, also is starting to put some things together and have a number of really excellent resources that are translated in Spanish. And I think they're working on other common languages in Massachusetts. So I think Haitian Creole and Portuguese are next.
That's great. Thank you. Another question from Kate. Does anyone know the status of abortion care for military members? Kate knew people had to request leave from their commander to travel for abortion care. Do folks on this panel know the answer to that?
Yeah, my understanding, and I'm not an expert in it, but my understanding is that it's much the same as it was before because of the Hyde Amendment, which has always restricted people who are part of the US military or any other federally funded insurance. So people who receive their healthcare through the Indian Health Service, for example, have never had access to abortion through those means and would have to seek it outside at cost to themselves unless there is some other, for example, people who have supplemental insurance that's privately funded or something like that. So I don't think that has changed. It was a challenge before and it's still a challenge.
Yeah, agree. And if folks have the chance to Google, there was a military servicewoman who gave this incredible, I don't know if it was a TikTok or something along those lines, on her views, having re-signed up for service and having the Dobbs decision come out just 5 days after she re-upped for service. She was pretty ticked off, and it was really a fierce video. Another question for folks, are there any major foundations stepping in to help with funding and supporting on reproductive rights? Who are those foundations, and should we be supporting those as well?
There are some large anonymous foundations that have stepped up.
Right. That's what we thought. And Neil has a good question also about what do folks think about providing care on federal lands? And is there room in this legal landscape to do that?
I'm by far no expert on this. However, Samantha B did an excellent segment on it not that long ago, featuring several law professors. There's a trio of law professors who have been writing pretty prolifically on what the federal government can do. I'm happy to share some of the op-eds that have been published. It's Greer Donnelly, Rachel Reboucher, and David Cohen, and they've identified some opportunities, but also some real challenges with providing care on federal lands, like what happens when you leave the federal, federally protected land. So I think there are some creative ideas out there, but I think a lot of it still needs to be further developed and better understood.
Yeah, and I think Becca, you made this point earlier. Using federal power as a solution is only as good as when we have control of who's in office. So the thought of trying to build more sort of local self-reliance is really, really critically important. There's another question in the chat about how to actively fight the onslaught of repressive tactics against vulnerable groups. Given that the federal government will not step in the breaches here, And if you guys had any specific input to how to best, sort of take on, getting involved or taking action.
Is this the question from someone who I'm guessing is a Brookline Town Meeting member?
It's from Alita.
Oh, I missed that one. Let me just say, I'm not an expert in how to combat white supremacist groups, so I don't want to, go over my skis there. But I do think proposing innovative ideas to your city or town, to your town councilor, is a really good thing to do. And then, they will vet that through their legal departments. But I definitely, think those are actions we have to take and be strong and forceful.
So we're coming close to a close, and I just wanted to turn over the floor to our speakers if you had anything in closing that you'd like to share with us or inspire us with. And I know, Becca, why don't you go first? Because I know you have to jump to go save all of our care providers.
Sorry, I'm just putting my email in the chat for Scott. Yeah, I really want your takeaway to be get involved in state and local elections. That's the best thing that you can do right now, because I have very real fears about a looming federal abortion ban. So, so please help us rebuild so that we can, eventually take back control. And with that, I am going to hop off because I've got to get up to the State House, but just appreciate everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Becca. We'll see you soon. Dr. St. Louis, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I reiterate what Becca said. And I think similarly thinking about abortion funds is a really important thing. And as I said, just, using your words to be an advocate, right? In the spaces that you're in and committees that you're on, organizations you work at, normalizing abortion, making it easy for folks really does help. And, I think similarly in Massachusetts, we are lucky that we have good protections here. But helping folks in other states, or if you yourself are in another state, looking to the folks who are doing it well to get a sense of how you might do it better, right? And we were talking about the Hyde Amendment before and how Medicaid often doesn't pay for abortion care in most states. It does in Massachusetts because Massachusetts has chosen to make that happen, right? And so for my patients who are low income, they don't need to worry about the cost, right? And so advocating for small changes like that in other states that are more progressive but are perhaps not as protective can really make a difference for folks on the ground.
Thank you. Dana?
Sure. I would continue to lift up supporting abortion funds and patient support organizations that help people get across state lines to and pay for travel and accommodations. And I would think about a sort of like adopting one in a particularly hostile state. These places like the Yellowhammer Fund in Alabama, there's the Roe Fund in Oklahoma. These are places that they have been fighting these fights in their states for so long, and they're doing it with such few resources. And I think that, really finding one maybe you have a connection to is a really great place to start. And then I would also implore any of the men who are on this conversation to also think about the ways in which access to abortion has benefited you in your life, and to start talking about it as well. I know we have, people with the capacity for pregnancy have been fighting this fight for a long time, have been in many ways sharing really heart-wrenching and difficult and stories or really personal stories. And I have seen even in the time that I've been doing this work, such a dramatic shift in the work that organizations like We Testify have done to tell abortion stories, to elevate the narrative that all abortions are okay, good, affirming things. And it's not one story over another or one that's more valued over another. But also, like, to the men, we also need you to talk about this and make this about community, about family, about what this means to you as well. So there's my plug. I'll turn over to Jen.
I'm also going to uplift the call to support abortion funds, local practical support networks, and particularly like reproductive justice organizations that have been advocating for these rights for decades as part of a broader call for humanity, dignity, and equity, and being able to just decide for everyone to be able to decide if, when, and how to form a family. I think it's important to invest in their leadership, donate to them, support them, and actually listen to them. This sort of goes, ties back to the discussion that we had about paying attention to the language that you use, right? Making sure that you use inclusive language, but also paying attention to what leaders on the ground, reproductive justice leaders on the ground, are telling you not to put on your protest posters, right? If a certain metaphor they're telling you is stigmatizing self-managed abortion, don't use it, and just sort of follow their lead. They've been doing this work for a really long time, and we need to listen to them. And then the one other thing that I kind of wanted to leave folks with, this sort of goes back to Karen's broader question of like how easy it is to sort of feel overwhelmed with everything that is going on, but particularly in the repro rights field, just like ban after ban, state after state, sort of, heavily restricting or banning abortion outright. Something that keeps me personally through it is every single person that gets an abortion who otherwise wouldn't have been able to get an abortion is a win. Like that is a huge win, because for that one person, it means that they were able to take control of the trajectory of their life, of their family, of their future. And it matters that we continue to keep fighting, particularly when, we have litigation that sometimes results in TROs being TROs being placed and then lifted. Like every day that a clinic is able to provide could mean as many as 40 to 60 patients. And that means 40 to 60 people per day that can really take hold of their own future and really chart their path on their own terms. And so that in and of itself is a win for that one person.
That is such a powerful note to wrap this up. I can't thank you all enough. And it's hard to follow the chat at the same time. But I know that a lot of people are feeling very, very grateful for all of you, and that it's empowering to hear what people are doing, and to be together and to know that we're not alone, and to keep fighting this fight. And Jen, I could not agree with your remarks more. It's so critically important to all of our dignity and access to the life that we want to have for ourselves. So thank you all from the bottom of my heart. It's been such an honor to be here with you. And there are some great comments and resources in the chat. And we'll try to collect as many of them discussed here today and share them with everyone. And a big thank you to Neil and to the Northeastern community for hosting us and for getting us together. I think it's critically important to be having these conversations. And thank you all for being here on such short notice. Thank you. Neil, anything else you want to add before we sign off?
That's it. Just mentioning again that we're going to have Bridget Amiri as our Brown Forum practitioner in residence, possibly in the fall. So look for notices on that. I'm grateful to every speaker's time today. We know that you have many places to be and you're working so hard on these issues right now. So very grateful to all of you and to all of our guests who joined us. So thank you, and grateful to Senator Warren for making time for remarks. And Karen, you did an exceptional job of moving it all very smoothly, managing the chat, and just being your wonderful self. So thank you, Karen.
Onward.
Onward, everyone.
Onward.
Do what
Be
you
well.
can.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, take care.